I was lucky twice. The first time was when I caught my wife in bed with another man. The second was when I discovered something in my house that turned my whole life upside down. Cheating? Oh, if only. Listen to find out. They say love is blind, but I think that's a lie. Love isn't blind, it just chooses to ignore the truth. I see that now. I see everything now. For 15 years, I dedicated my life to a woman who never loved me. I worked late nights, poured my sweat and soul into building a life for us, thinking I was creating something solid, something lasting. I believed in marriage, in loyalty, in the idea that if you put in the work, you'd get something meaningful in return. But what I got was betrayal wrapped in silk sheets, dressed in designer clothes, and sealed with a smirk. It didn't start like this, of course. In the beginning, she was everything I thought I wanted, beautiful, charming, full of life. She knew how to make me feel important, like I was the center of her world. But looking back, I see the warning signs. The little cracks in the illusion. The way she never really asked about my day, never showed any real interest in my struggles or ambitions. The way she always wanted more gifts, more money, more attention, but never wanted to give anything in return. Still, I ignored it. I told myself it was normal. That I was just providing for the woman I loved. And so I worked harder. Took on more hours. Climbed higher. And she took advantage of every bit of it. Over the years, the woman I married turned into someone I barely recognized. She stopped cooking, stopped taking care of the house. She refused to lift a finger, claiming she wasn't some 1950s housewife. Fine, I didn't marry her to be a maid. But it wasn't just that. She stopped caring altogether, about me, about us. When I came home late, exhausted, I was met with cold silence or sarcastic remarks about how I was never around. But the moment I had a free weekend, she had plans of her own, shopping sprees, brunches with her equally entitled friends, spa days funded by my hard work. If I ever dared to question the expenses, I was met with rolling eyes and a scoff. "What's the point of making money if we don't enjoy it?" she'd say, as if she had earned a single dollar of it. There were nights I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling, wondering where things had gone wrong. When had I become nothing more than a paycheck to her? When had love turned into obligation? But the worst part wasn't her disrespect. It wasn't even the way she laughed at me behind my back, making me the punchline of her jokes with her friends. No, the worst part was that deep down, I knew she didn't even see me as a man anymore. She never touched me. Never looked at me with warmth or desire. I was invisible to her, until the credit card bill arrived or she needed something expensive. And then, one night, I realized something else. A suspicion crept into my mind, something dark, something I didn't want to believe. Was she seeing someone else? The thought alone made my stomach turn. I pushed it away, convinced myself I was overthinking. But then the signs became too clear to ignore. She started dressing differently. I noticed it first on a random Tuesday. She walked past me, headed out the door, wearing a dress she hadn't touched in years. It was tight, low-cut, the kind of thing she used to wear for me when we were younger. But this time, it wasn't for me. Her perfume was stronger. Her phone was always face down, buzzing at odd hours. She took longer to get ready, but never for our dates, because we didn't have any. I asked her, casually at first, where she was going. "Out," she'd say, her tone clipped, dismissive. And then, there were the late nights. The excuses? The way she barely flinched when I came home later than usual, as if she didn't even care where I was anymore. I started paying attention. Watching. Taking mental notes. One night, I checked the bank statements. Thousands of dollars spent at places I'd never heard of. Luxury hotels, upscale restaurants. I knew she wasn't going there alone. The final straw was the whispering. I heard it through the door late one night, her hushed voice, the soft murmur of laughter. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my throat, and I heard it. A name. His name. That's when I knew. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to ask her. I wasn't going to beg for answers, for the truth she had no intention of giving me. No, I was going to find out for myself. So the next evening, When I told her I'd be working late, I didn't go to the office. I turned off my phone, parked down the street, and waited. Sure enough, at exactly 9:45 p.m., the lights in our bedroom flickered on. Shadows moved behind the curtains. And then I saw him. A man. In my home. In my bed. I could have stormed in right then. Could have kicked down the door, thrown him out, demanded answers. But I didn't. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the betrayal playing out in real time. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the way she laughed. The way she moved so effortlessly in the space that was supposed to belong to us. I waited. I let the rage settle, let the eyes take over. Then I got out of the car and walked inside. Up the stairs. Down the hall. The bedroom door was cracked open, warm light spilling into the hallway. I pushed it open. And there she was. My wife. Tangled in silk sheets, her body wrapped around him. The smell hit me first, perfume and sweat. She looked up, eyes locking onto mine. And then, she smirked. "Oh, look who finally decided to come home," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "What? You thought I'd just sit around waiting for you? Please. You're lucky I even stuck around this long." The man beside her didn't flinch. He just chuckled, not even bothering to cover himself. Something inside me snapped. Not in rage. Not in heartbreak. In clarity. She had never loved me. She had loved what I could provide. And now, she was throwing it in my face, as if I was too pathetic to do anything about it. But oh, she had no idea who she was dealing with. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't even react. I turned around and walked out. Because this wasn't the end of the story. No. This was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the dark road ahead, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. There was no anger anymore. No sadness. Just one thought, cold and clear. She thought she could humiliate me, strip me down to nothing, and walk away with everything I worked for. She thought I would yell, break down, demand answers. She wanted a reaction. But the best revenge isn't rage, it's silence. It's patience. It's watching the person who betrayed you realize too late that they destroyed themselves. And that's exactly what I was going to do. At dawn I got to work. I had built everything we had. Every dollar, every asset, it all came from my sweat and sacrifice. And that meant I had control. The first step was cutting off her supply. I logged into our accounts and transferred every cent out of our joint bank account. I left her exactly $50. Enough for a cheap lunch, but not enough to maintain her little fantasy world. Then, the credit cards. I didn't just freeze them, I canceled them outright. No warning. No explanation. Her precious designer lifestyle? Gone in an instant. Next, I secured my assets. I called my lawyer, a shark of a man I kept on retainer for business dealings. I explained the situation, and within hours we had a plan. Filed for divorce under the grounds of adultery. Ensured she'd get nothing, no alimony, no house, no car, nothing but the clothes on her back. Gathered evidence, text messages, financial records, photos from that night. Everything I needed to legally bury her. The best part? I didn't have to hire a private investigator. My wife was sloppy, arrogant. She left a trail so obvious a blind man could follow it. By noon, the papers were in motion. And by the end of the day, she'd start to feel the walls closing in. The first sign that something was wrong came in the afternoon. I was sitting in my office when my phone buzzed. A text from her. "Hey, my card isn't working. What's going on?" I let it sit. Ignored it. Then another. And another. By the fifth text, the tone changed. "Are you serious? Why are my accounts empty?" I smirked, leaned back in my chair. Then, the calls started. I let them ring. By the time I got home that evening, she was waiting. She was pacing in the living room, phone in one hand, face twisted in fury. "What the hell did you do?" I walked past her, calm, collected. I poured myself a drink, took a slow sip. Then I turned to face her, watching the realization dawn on her spoiled, entitled face. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She knew. And for the first time in years, she was scared. The next few days were glorious. She called her friends for help. But friendships built on status and luxury crumble fast when money disappears. Nobody wanted to lend her a dime. She tried to use her connections to find a lawyer. But my lawyer was 10 steps ahead. She was trapped. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. One evening, I was sitting at home, watching TV, when I heard the door slam open. She stormed in, eyes wild, hair a mess. She wasn't the confident, smug woman from that night. She was unraveling. "You're ruining my life!" she screamed. "You can't do this to me!" I didn't react. I just stared at her, let the silence stretch. Then I said, "You made your choice. Now live with it." Her lip trembled. The fire in her eyes flickered. For the first time, she looked small. And I enjoyed every second of it. It's funny, really. How quickly the mighty fall when their foundation is built on lies, manipulation, and greed. Just a few days ago, my wife had everything: a luxurious lifestyle, unlimited spending, a husband who worked himself to the bone just to keep her happy. And now? Now she was unraveling before my eyes. And I loved every second of it. The moment I told her, "You made your choice. Now live with it," something in her cracked. She had spent years looking down on me, treating me like a means to an end, laughing at my back while she spent my money on another man. And now, she was standing in my living room, begging. At first, she tried to play it off. As if I didn't see her in our bed with that guy. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she scoffed, folding her arms. "It was nothing. Just a mistake." A mistake. I let out a short laugh and shook my head. I didn't argue. I didn't try to reason. Because I didn't care anymore. She must have sensed it, the shift in power. She was used to me being the one chasing, the one fixing things, the one making sure she had everything she wanted. But now I was done. And that terrified her. The second attempt, the tears. When deception didn't work, she turned to manipulation. She dropped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, forcing out choked sobs. "I messed up," she whispered. "I was lonely. You were always working. I didn't know how to tell you how unhappy I was. I should have felt something, pity, sadness, maybe even regret. But all I felt was disgust." She wasn't crying because she lost me. She was crying because she lost my money. She peeked up through her fingers, waiting for me to cave, to comfort her like I always had. But I just sat there, staring, unmoved. And I think that's when she finally realized, nothing she said could change what was coming. The switch was instant. 1 second, she was the fragile, teary-eyed victim, the next, she was on her feet, screaming. "You're doing this just to punish me!" She spat, her face twisted in rage. "You were never a real man. That's why I had to go somewhere else." Ah. There it was. The real her. I just smiled, slow and deliberate, letting her words bounce off me like they meant nothing. Because they didn't. "If I was never a real man," I said calmly, "then why are you so desperate to stay in my house, spend my money, and keep my lifestyle?" Her face drained of color. She had nothing. No comeback. No control. For the first time, she was powerless. The next morning, she woke up to an empty closet. Her designer bags? Gone. Her expensive jewelry? Gone. Everything she had was because of me. And now it was gone. I had legally transferred all the assets out of her reach, reclaimed every single thing she once flaunted. She had no car, no credit cards, no home, and nothing. She came storming into the kitchen, wild-eyed and furious. "You can't do this. I have rights." I took a slow sip of my coffee, then slid a thick envelope across the counter. The divorce papers. Filed. Finalized. Irrevocable. She snatched them up, flipping through the pages, her hands shaking. "This isn't fair. You can't just throw me out like this." I leaned in, my voice calm, even. You threw yourself out the moment you brought another man into my house. She's screaming, cursing, begging. You can tell a lot about a person by how they act when they have nothing left. Some take responsibility, own their mistakes, and try to rebuild. Others? They scramble, clawing at anything they can, desperate to hold on to the life they thought they were entitled to. My soon-to-be ex-wife? She was the second kind. And I was going to enjoy watching her crumble. After she saw the divorce papers, she tried one last desperate move, refusing to leave the house. She sat in the living room, arms crossed, chin high, as if she still had control. I'm not going anywhere, she declared. This is my home too. Wrong. I pulled out my phone, opened up a message from my lawyer, and showed her the court order. The house? It was in my name. Everything in it? Mine. She had no legal claim to anything. And just like that, the last bit of fight drained from her. She stared at the papers, her hands shaking. For the first time, true panic flickered across her face. She had spent years thinking she was untouchable, believing she could do whatever she wanted with no consequences. Now, reality was slapping her in the face. She spent the next few days calling everyone she knew, trying to find a lifeline. Her friends? Gone. The sane women she used to laugh with, the ones she mocked me with? They vanished the second she had nothing to offer. Her lover? Disappeared. The moment he realized she was broke, that she wouldn't be living in luxury anymore, he ghosted her like she never existed. She tried calling me, leaving voicemails full of venom and threats. When that didn't work, she switched to begging. Please, I have nowhere to go. Just give me time. I never responded. Instead, I sent one final message. A simple text with just 2 words. Be out. And on the morning of the deadline, she was. I came home that evening, expecting the place to be trashed, expecting some kind of final act of revenge. But no. The house was untouched. Spotless. She had left without a trace. Except for one thing. A single note, sitting on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, read the shaky handwriting. You'll regret this. One day you'll miss me. I laughed. Actually laughed. I folded the note, tossed it into the trash where it belonged, and poured myself a drink. Because the truth was, I'd never been happier. And she? She was just another mistake I'd erased from my life. Time has a funny way of setting things right. It had been 6 months since I last saw her, 6 months since I threw her out of my house, out of my life, and watched her world collapse. And in those 6 months, I rebuilt myself. The divorce had been swift, clean, merciless. She got nothing. No alimony. No house. No car. No credit cards. And me? I thrived. I spent my time living, not just surviving. I worked out, traveled, invested in myself for the first time in years. I reconnected with old friends, men I had pushed aside while I wasted my life trying to please a woman who never deserved me. And best of all? I moved on. Not just from her, but from the weak, pathetic version of myself who had let her walk all over him for years. That man was gone. And I never looked back. Then, one evening, fate decided to give me a little gift. I was leaving a restaurant after dinner with a woman, a real woman, one who actually appreciated me. She laughed at my jokes, reached for the check even though I insisted on paying, touched my arm like she actually cared. We stepped outside, the cool night air wrapping around us, and then I saw her. My ex-wife. Or at least, the broken, worn-out version of the woman she used to be. She stood near the curb, dressed in cheap, faded clothes. No designer bags, no expensive jewelry, no perfectly styled hair. Her once manicured nails were chipped, her eyes hollowed by stress. She looked desperate. She saw me. Her gaze flickered to the woman beside me, taking in her radiant smile, the way she leaned into me, the effortless happiness between us. And then? She forced a smile. She walked up hesitant, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. Hey, wow. You look good. I just nodded, waiting. She licked her lips, shifting her weight. I was thinking maybe we could talk? You know, start fresh? Start fresh. I nearly laughed in her face. This woman had spit on my love, torn me down, humiliated me. She had laid in my bed with another man, spent my money like it was hers, and mocked me behind my back. And now, when life had chewed her up and spit her out, she wanted another chance? I smiled, slow and deliberate, watching her shift nervously under my gaze. Then I said the words I had been waiting months to say. You already started fresh. Just not the way you wanted. Her face fell. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to plead, but I was already turning away, walking toward my car, toward my new life. As I opened the door, my date looked up at me, curious. Who was that? I didn't even glance back. No one. And with that I drove off, leaving her standing there, alone, in the life she created for herself. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free. Life had never been sweeter. 6 months ago, I walked away from the wreckage of my marriage, leaving my cheating wife to drown in the mess she created. And in those 6 months, I became the man I was always meant to be. I rebuilt myself, physically, mentally, financially. I worked out, sharpened my mind, expanded my business, and most importantly, I learned. I learned that love isn't about blind devotion or sacrificing yourself for someone who doesn't deserve it. It's about respect. Mutual effort. And this time, I thought I had found exactly that. The woman from that night, the one who had been by my side when I ran into my ex, her name was Julia. And for a while, she felt like a breath of fresh air. She was sweet, affectionate, nothing like my ex-wife. Or at least, that's what I thought. It's funny how betrayal sharpens your instincts. When you've been played once, you start noticing patterns. And with Julia? The red flags were there. She was charming, but opportunistic. Always asking where we were going for dinner but never offering to cook. She loved gifts, expensive outings, fancy vacations, all things that I paid for. And worst of all, she was too curious about my finances. At first, I brushed it off. Told myself I was overthinking. That I was just traumatized from my last marriage. But then, I saw the signs again. The late-night texts. The sudden, work meetings, that lasted too long. The way her phone was always face down, just like my ex-wife's used to be. So I did what I should have done the first time, I watched. I waited. And when the moment was right, I caught her in the act. It happened late one night, just like before. I had told Julia I was heading out of town for a business trip, but instead, I came home early. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something familiar, a second car parked out front. I didn't hesitate. I walked inside calm, controlled, already knowing what I was about to find. Up the stairs. Down the hall. The bedroom door was slightly open, warm lights spilling out. I could hear them, low laughter, hushed whispers. I pushed the door open. And there she was. Julia. Wrapped around some other guy. The scene was the same, perfume, sweat, tangled sheets. But the difference? I wasn't shocked this time. She gasped when she saw me, eyes wide with panic. The guy beside her scrambled, reaching for his clothes, stammering some pathetic excuse. But I didn't care about him. I looked at her. The woman who had pretended to be different. The woman who had smiled in my face while sneaking around behind my back. And I felt nothing. No anger. No heartbreak. Just disappointment. She started to speak, but I cut her off with a smirk. Don't bother. I already moved your stuff out. Her face dropped. Because unlike last time, I wasn't going to waste a single second on explanations. I had already packed her things. Already cut her off. Already erased her. This time, there was no messy divorce, no financial battles, no begging. Just a clean, efficient elimination. She tried to argue, tried to play the victim, but I wasn't interested. I simply turned, walked out of the bedroom, and left her there, half naked and exposed. By morning, she was gone. And just like that, I was free. Again. I sat on my balcony that night, drinking a glass of whiskey, staring out over the city. And I laughed. Because I had finally learned the truth, some people don't want love. They just want what you can give them. But the difference now? I knew how to spot them. And I would never be that fool again. Life has a way of coming full circle. I thought my story had already reached its conclusion. My ex-wife? Destroyed. My rebound? Exposed and erased. I had cut away the dead weight, walked away stronger, and for the first time in years, I was truly free. Or so I thought. But fate had one last surprise waiting for me. A few weeks after kicking Julia out, I finally decided to clear out the last remnants of my past. The house was already spotless. Everything connected to my ex-wife had been thrown out, burned, or donated. But there was one place I hadn't touched in years, the attic. I wasn't even sure why I went up there that night. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe something was waiting for me. The attic was musty, filled with forgotten junk, old furniture, boxes of things I hadn't seen in over a decade. I was about to leave when something caught my eye. In the far corner, tucked behind some old suitcases, was a small wooden chest. It was covered in dust, the lock rusted, like it hadn't been opened in years. But here's the thing, I had never seen it before. I frowned, dragging it into the light. My hands shook as I pried it open. Inside was a pile of old letters, photographs, and documents. Some of them were yellowed with age, fragile from time. And at the very top? A birth certificate. My breath hitched as I read the name. Not mine. The date? It lined up perfectly with my marriage. And the mother's name? My ex-wife. She had a child. A child I never knew about. Connecting the dots. I tore through the papers, scanning the letters, the documents. And the more I read, the clearer the truth became. She had been pregnant before we got married. The father? Not me. She had hidden it. Lied. Passed the baby off as someone else's responsibility. Swept the entire thing under the rug. That's why she was so desperate to marry me back then. She needed security. A provider. A fool. I tracked her down easily enough. She wasn't exactly living her dream life anymore. A rundown apartment, a low-paying job, a far cry from the high-maintenance lifestyle she used to flaunt. She opened the door, startled, eyes flickering with a mix of anger and fear. She wasn't expecting me. Before she could speak, I held up the birth certificate. Explain this. Her face strained of color. And in that moment I knew. She tried to stammer out an excuse, some half-baked lie about it not being what it looked like. But she knew she was caught. Completely. Years of manipulation. A marriage built on deception. A secret child she hid from me. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the ultimate con. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an argument. Didn't yell, didn't ask why. I just smiled. Because now, I had the final piece of leverage. I turned to leave, but before I did, I leaned in and whispered. You always thought you were playing me. But in the end? You played yourself? And then, I walked away, never looking back. Because now, I knew the truth. And she would have to live with it.